Today is January 7, 2017, and as usual, let's ask our Heavenly Family to guide us. Heavenly Family, thank you so much for everything. Thank you for love. Thank you for truth. Thank you for the opportunity that we have through modern technology to get together and to study, to consider these vast and important subjects. So please guide us, help us to understand whatever it is that you want us to understand tonight, and bind us together in love, and let your kingdom be established once and forever. Toda. Thank you. We ask this, B'Shem Tzemach, Hu Wahi, in the name of branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Okay. Well, so of course, for those of you guys who were on last night, which may be everyone here, we're of course talking about the principles of truth and knowing things and what we've had to unlearn, what we have been learning, and kind of how to deal with everything. And then I read part of the article I'm writing, What is Truth? And after that, we didn't, dialogue a whole lot more, some of the different elements. So I don't know if there were, anything that you guys had in contemplating our discussion last night, any kind of follow-up comments or questions or anything like that. But rather than just kind of jumping into something else right away, I just wanted to ask if there's anything that anyone had in mind related to what we discussed last night. So, does anyone have anything?
I got visited by some 3 Mormon young men, or one was an older man, last night, and so I spent part of the meeting talking to them. Anyway, and then I listened to the meeting over again, but I still can't tell somebody else what truth is. So I'm ready to understand it better.
Well, that's good. This is a subject that we should certainly always seek to understand better. And in terms of, being able to explain it to others and so on, I suppose there are many ways in which it could be explained, and just studying it more, trying to understand it more will help you to be able to explain it. The bottom line is that the word truth, what it means, is something that matches material reality. Or you could say it even is material reality. And that's really the bottom line. And the reason why I gave those 2 kind of definitions is because it could be used in different ways. You could use the word truth to refer to the mental picture that someone has about reality, so long as it matches reality, and that is truth. Or you could just use it to say, what really is true, what is truth really itself, and you could say, well, it's material reality itself. But if you're talking about truth in terms of truth versus error and the claims that people have and so on and so forth, what it means for something to be true is simply that it matches material reality. So that's explaining what it is. I know that getting there, that might be the point where, to demonstrate that that is the case might be where you might, be wondering more, okay, how do you explain that in a way that makes sense to people, in a way that they can recognize? And the way that I think is maybe even best, is you could use any example that's around you. You know, you could talk to someone and, you know, like, you know how I've done this so many times, right? I've said, we are on this call right now. Is that a true statement? Yes. What does it mean that it's true? Well, all it means is that it matches what is really going on in the physical world. And that's it, you know. So you can give little examples like that, and that basically explains it. That explains what truth is. So I hope that helps. I just wanted to give like a little nutshell version of things without adding too much extra, in case it'll help you to just kind of like, okay, grab a hold of it and be able to really get it.
Yeah, that helped, but I guess I don't understand real well what material reality is then either.
Oh, hey, that's an excellent follow-up question. Okay, yeah, what is material reality? Well, the word reality just refers to that which is real as opposed to that which is not real. So there is, you know, in philosophy, there's a belief called realism, and basically it holds that things actually are a certain way. There is a such thing as what is real. This whole thing isn't just some confused mishmash of contradictory things going on in an inexplainable universe. You know, it's not like everything is just an idea and that's it. And so that's another view called idealism. It's the belief that really ideas are the only things which really exist, and everything else is just a manifestation of that. So, like, someone who's an idealist will believe things like, you know, if you hear a tree fall down in a forest or see a tree fall down in a forest, then it did happen in a sense, but it's only your mental projection. But if no one heard it fall down or saw it fall down or anything like that, then it didn't fall down. There was no tree that fell down, period. It just hasn't happened because basically reality is determined by what one thinks. Realism, though, says, no, there is an independent reality apart from what people think and so on and so forth. And this has been actually tested scientifically a lot, and it's been very easily confirmed multiple times that, no, there is actually an independent reality, and there is stuff that happens, you know, regardless of people seeing it. And, you know, you could always say, you could do something like, okay, well, you could leave something in a room and have it not observed, and you could just have a video camera recording it and have no one there at the time, and then later go back and view the video camera and see, hey, look, stuff is happening in the room even though no one's observing it, or, you know, whatever. But, of course, the idealist could always say, well, I just made up the video camera recording or the video after the fact in my mind and am watching it. But what ends up happening is that an idealist is always having to excuse away evidence rather than just looking at the evidence and following what it says. And most idealists, people who believe that, you know, reality is just made by our thoughts and everything's a mental projection, they actually acknowledge that there is a whole bunch of stuff that happens that no human and no animal and all of that is seeing. And so thus, you know, they basically say that in order for things to really happen the way that they are, there must be someone who is seeing everything, an all-seeing eye, a consciousness that observes all and makes everything come into being by his thoughts, and that must be God, and that sort of thing. Again, there's way more holes in this than I could go through possibly right now, although we could go through more if we need to. But realism just says there is a such thing as reality. It's not just all our imagination and all of that. So there is a such thing as reality. So that's the first part that is important to understand. Material reality. Well, what's that? That's describing the nature of reality to be composed of matter. Matter is it can be broken down to little bits of physical stuff, rather than, some sort of intangible, incomprehensible, whatever, stuff or non-stuff, however you want to do it. It's not just, nothing. People kind of like imagine the existence of things that aren't actually physical, like people imagine like the Force from Star Wars or something like that. The Force is supposed to be something that is flowing all through all things, and it can't be seen, it can't be heard, it can't be sensed with physical senses because it's not physical, but yet somehow it supposedly has an impact on the world and the universe. So basically, that's the idea, as best as can be comprehended, of non-physical stuff. And sometimes people think ideas are non-physical things, which isn't the case either, because an idea isn't actually a thing. It's an action. It's a process. But to say material is just talking about matter, and matter is just bits of physical stuff. That's like an easy way to explain it. Of course, that's not describing the attributes of matter. You could break it down to talk about how matter is composed of particles. Particles are those little bits of physical stuff that I'm talking about. And basically, it's kind of like a way to understand it is like this. Imagine you have just something in front of you. Let's just say it's a piece of bread. Well, you could break that apart, and let's take a crumb off of it. Well, you can break that crumb into two parts. So you have smaller crumbs, and then you can take one of those crumbs, the small crumbs, and break it up again. And you can keep breaking it apart into little tiny bits. And you can get smaller and smaller and smaller. Then you end up with a molecule, and then you have the atoms that make up the molecule, and you could just choose one atom, and you could break that up into smaller little bits. So you have protons and neutrons and electrons. And you can keep breaking these up until you get to whatever is the smallest little bit, but it's still a little physical thing. So materialism says that everything in the universe, everything that exists, is made up of little bits of stuff, little particles of physical stuff that's actually real, just like everything else is. So everything can be broken up into little bits of stuff. And that's the nature of reality. That's what it is for something to be material, to be made of physical stuff. Does that help?
Yeah. Our body's made out of 66 trillion cells, and they can be anything, any part of the body that needs to be made.
Yeah, and you can break up each of those cells further and further and further, and basically that's all there is, little bits of matter put together into bigger chunks of matter, and in various forms and so on. And that's basically what it is. That's the nature of the universe. There's nothing else aside from that. And everything that we call a thing, in a sense, everything that can be referred to by means of a noun, which is not actually bits of physical matter, are actually just descriptions of processes or actions. Now, usually people would say, verbs are what describe actions. But you can use something that seems more like a noun, and you're describing an action, you're describing a process. Migration, something like that is describing a process, but it's not an independent thing that exists out there. It's just describing the interaction between physical things. So That's what materialism is. It's saying everything is made up of little bits of physical stuff, and that, those things interact, and those interactions are just that, interactions between physical stuff.
Amen. Every cell has a blueprint for the whole body in it. It takes 20 cells to make the width of a hair, yet a nerve cell can reach half the length of the body. Pretty amazing.
Amazing indeed. Amen. So are there any other comments or questions, whether on these aspects that we're talking about or what we talked about last night?
I had a question. I don't know if I can exactly put it into words, but today, I think the Heavenly Sister may be bringing me personally, and maybe others, I don't know, to a crisis of belief in certain aspects, which I know is incredibly necessary to to examine your beliefs so you know what you believe. And a lot of things, just honestly, I've just never thought about, and I even thought I've dealt with it, but I realized, the last couple of days that I really hadn't. And one of them I started really thinking about was atheism, and how, what is reality for an atheist, and how would I feel if I found out there was no God? And I know we did a study on does God exist, but let's say you came to the conclusion that there's no God, and I just started thinking of what that reality would look like, with I think it would be really depressing, looking at animals that kill each other, and the human mind that comes up with all these different religions, and just how sad humanity, how sad basically human and animal have quote unquote evolved into such patheticness. It just seems like it would be what a sad reality that would be to me. And then I started thinking, if there's no afterlife, if there is no God, then why wouldn't you? I know this is going to sound horrible on my part. I'm going to sound like a terrible person, but I was just thinking, if I had $1 million and I was an atheist, why wouldn't I just blow it on myself? I'm not necessarily out to hurt anybody, but if everyone's just going to die, and it just seems like the world is so horrible, naturally horrible, that why wouldn't I just take that money and just go on a cruise, and one cruise after another, and travel the world and do whatever I wanted to? And I know a lot of people say, well, it feels good to help other people, and I could see where an atheist wouldn't really want to hurt anybody, but and I know we have a lot of similarities with atheists in our materialistic view of things. I understand that, but it just seems like a real hopeless reality. I'm just curious why there's what I don't know if anyone on the call has been an atheist, and what they've ever thought about that. What hope did you have if you were an atheist? What hope does an atheist have?
It's a very interesting question, or compilation of a couple questions could be broken up, from within the broader thing that you're asking. First, I want to say that I understand your question, and I'm about to kind of pick it apart in a sense, and mention a couple assumptions that are part of your question. But aside from that, I just want to mention that even regardless of the assumptions and other things I'm going to say, I still get your question, and it still has a functional role in regard to life. Were you wanting to say something?
Well, I'm just curious. Are there any people on who have been atheists?
What exactly is an atheist?
An atheist does not believe that there is a God.
This is actually one of the things that I wanted to specify, because often people think of atheist or atheism, and they attach a whole bunch of other things to it, like naturalism and like being irreligious and all these other things. But none of that is actually equated with atheism. Atheism is simply a position on one specific question. And that one specific question is, do you believe that any God exists? And the atheist position is no. It's not saying that the atheist says that there is no God, but an atheist simply does not actively believe in the existence of any God. But there are atheists who are Buddhists, who are Hindus, who believe in afterlife, who believe in reincarnation, who believe in a host of other things. Atheism is just simply a position in regard to that one specific question. And, like you mentioned, evolution and so on, there are plenty of atheists who don't believe in evolution. And it's just, different. There's a lot of things that we commonly attach to atheism, and when atheism is really just responding to that one question about the existence of God. But I get what you're saying, though, in that you're kind of asking a broader question, talking about people who are not only atheists but also materialists, and also don't believe in an afterlife and all these other things. But anyway, yeah, if there is anyone else does want to comment in terms of like if you've been an atheist and kind of like in answer to Mary's question, then feel free to do that before I kind of mention some other aspects.
I thought they mainly didn't believe in the God that everybody else believes in. Either they got something else they believe in, and also that the thought just disappeared from my frontal lobe. Oh, that they can get a blessing. They're blessed, or they enjoy helping others, I think. They get a blessing.
I was raised, my father was an atheist, and I think, I remember as a fairly young person, as a kid, like just seeing the complexity of nature and believing at a young age, in spite of what my father believed, that there had to be some kind of a creator. It just seemed too complex to me. But what I wanted to say, my father was like he cared a lot about other people. Like he was the kind of person that can relate to anyone and everyone at their level. And he was a prominent businessman, so he knew people at all levels, from government officials all the way down to like fishing guides and, people in his different interests. But he was he cared about other people. He always wanted to treat people right and that. So, he had a very, I would say as a very strong moral compass. And I don't know how much of that moral compass, his parents were Catholic. He was raised Catholic. And I don't know how much of his moral compass was based on, the culture of his family and so on. I'm sure a lot of our moral compass is based on a Christian culture, but it's not something he talked about ever really. It just seemed like it was his moral compass to me as a kid anyway.
Amen.
So I don't know if anyone else had any comment in reply to that, but some of the things that crossed my mind, in terms of, if someone believes, or I should specify, if someone does not have a certain belief in a God, they're still going to have a lot of beliefs about a lot of other things. They're going to have perspectives on the world and how the world should be, and I'll specify down, like, obviously, if you're talking about atheist Hindus who believe in reincarnation and so on, then they have a certain view of the world. But let's just take, secular, humanist atheists in North America and English-speaking Europe. And, people who don't believe in an afterlife and anything like that. A lot of people in that position still do believe that it's important to be moral. And the reason why is simply, they look at the world and say, hey, you know what? I don't like it when, someone steals from me or hurts me or does this and that. And since I don't like it, other people probably don't like it either. And man, won't this world just be a better place if we all just do to others what we would have them do to us? It's just a simple principle that someone can see regardless of religion. And people end up following that. Like, hey, it just makes sense. Let's just try to do good. And so that's, a lot of people go in that direction. I could see how some people could just say, oh, well, if I get $1 million, I'm just going to spend it on myself. But there's no real connection between that and being atheist. Someone could, as an atheist, say, hey, if I get $1 million, it just makes sense because, to put this to charity or something, because there's a lot more important things in this world than me going on a really nice vacation or getting a car and whatever, all these different things that I want to get.
Self-gratification.
Yeah, they could just simply recognize that it would be selfish people, and I don't want to be a selfish person, so I'm going to try and share this with everyone, especially those who need it the most. So someone could definitely come to that conclusion. In terms of, kind of the purpose of life and no afterlife and things like that, different secular atheists have different perspectives on that. Some think that, some are really glad that there's no afterlife, actually. But that's because the perception of what an afterlife is supposed to be to them just sounds horrible. So either burning in hell forever or spending eternity with a tyrant who's joyful that people are burning in hell forever. Now that certainly doesn't sound really appealing, So some secular atheists are perfectly fine with like, okay, you know what? Just, I'm glad that there's no afterlife or whatever. Others may be open to the possibility of an afterlife, but might just say, hey, even if there's no afterlife, why should that change the value of what's happening at the present? Why should that change the joy that I can have in the present? And kind of like we have a short life, may as well make the most of it and be happy and try to make the world a better place for posterity. And kind of have that sort of perspective and view there, a lot of people don't see there being any sort of built-in purpose for the universe or anything like that, and they consider it a privilege to make their own purpose and their own meaning in life.
You raise an interesting point, Mary, and it's one that I've thought of before. And over the past few years, I've, been exposed to a lot of different information from what I've been exposed to in my past. I've learned a lot about scientific method. I've learned a lot about archaeology. I've learned a lot about what kind of archaeology has taken place. I've learned a lot about different worldviews, including atheism and anti-theism and all these different things. And I was confused as to how an atheist or even an anti-theist could. I'm going to try not to choose careful words or choose my words real carefully, even though I know it's going to make me sound like, well, you'll know what I sound like. Anyway, it didn't make sense to me that they could be good people, or they could be nice, or they could have any morals or values. And, what would be their motivation for doing anything nice? What would be their motivation for being honest and all these different things? And I'm just sharing my personal experience, as in I literally didn't get it. I didn't get how if you didn't believe in God, well, why would you be nice? And then I was exposed to atheists who talk about the fact that people have that viewpoint. And they're like, okay, that's scary. Okay, this is the atheist talking now, or the anti-theist even, whoever. That's really scary. Are you telling me the only reason you're not out stealing and lying and murdering is because you believe there's a God who's going to punish you if you're bad? Now that is scary. And I heard that and I was like, oh my goodness, they are so right. They are so right. And I was like, ooh, that's been me. That's been me pretty much my whole life, whether I thought of it that way or not, And it really made me rethink my values. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, even if there were no God, I see the value in following what I understand to be the law of God, to be loving, bottom line. And so that really woke me up to some of the aspects of my character and my personality. And I recognized that if I had just grown up not believing in God, I probably would have been pretty awful. So that had an effect on me. And then I used that awareness to just really do some self-examining and to come to some decisions, that I had to make in my life as to why I would want to do good. And I still believe in God. I believe in Yahweh, the existence of Yahweh. I believe in the existence of all these other beings, whether they are good or bad or nice or not nice, I personally believe that I have adequate evidence to prove the existence of other beings, not from this planet, and that those beings are very much involved in what goes on this planet, and that some of them are good and some of them are not good. Some of them are loving and some of them are not loving. And I feel like I have enough evidence to fully embrace the message of the branch and to follow it wherever it leads. But one of the things that I know for sure is in the existence of our heavenly family. And so even though I still believe, my motivation for wanting to be loving no longer is centered around fear of punishment or judgment.
And let me ask you a question, too. What would you do if our heavenly family turned against the principles of love and became absolutely tyrannical, would you still follow the principles of love?
Oh, yeah, I don't see that I'd have any other choice. You know?
Absolutely.
I mean, why, just because they're God, why would you then decide, oh, if they're doing it, then I should do it too?
Exactly. And it highlights something also that's mentioned in the Apocryphon of James, where Jesus is talking to James and Peter, and I don't have the book right in front of me right now. If I did, I would probably read it. But okay, wonder so that Teresa got up right away to go get it. So yeah, no, hey, that's good. That's awesome. I'll be sure to read it. I'm not sure if it's there or if it's on top of those other books.
I see it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, but it has a place where Jesus says something that is so interesting. So 1 second here. Well, it has lots of places where Jesus says lots of things that are so interesting.
It's probably the most amazing piece of writing I've ever come across, the Apocryphon of James.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Okay, this is what it says. I tell you the truth. Whoever will receive life and believe in the kingdom will never leave it, not even if the Father wants to banish him. Now, that is awesome. That's amazing. He's saying that even if God turns on you and wants to banish you from the kingdom, no, you're not going to leave the kingdom. You're going to be living by the principles of the kingdom no matter what. That is someone who truly receives life and believes in the kingdom. If they decide not to believe in the kingdom, then they'll do what Lucifer did and turn against the kingdom just because he can't experience the joy in it because of the rebellion that he engaged in. But if Satan was really caring about truth, and if he really had a better way, he would live by the principles of truth and righteousness, even not being in the heavenly kingdom. So, yeah, lots of interesting aspects, but that's a very important principle.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've just never considered the reality of there not being a God. I mean, I've thought about it to some degree, but not like yesterday and today. And I have to say that my experience is kind of like yours, Teresa. Like, I'm really thinking, like, oh, what would I do? Like, why would I do the right thing? Why would I control my thoughts or my words or, I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to, again, it's like you think, well, you wouldn't want to have a horrible existence. And, of course, it's fun having friends and everything, and you have to, be a friend to have a friend and all those things. And I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do. I've just been trying to think of, like, wow, what would I do? And my question was, if I had $1 million and I was an atheist, what would I do? And I don't know. It's I guess kind of sad, but I'm kind of thankful that I've had to really examine myself on that because how else was I really going to know who I was? I guess who I really am, I should say. I don't know. It was just interesting, and it was similar to what you were thinking, Teresa. I hate to say. But
yeah, very interesting. I think it's a fruitful question and everything. Something that I want to mention too, I really look forward to conducting a huge variety of further experiments in terms of the existence of our heavenly family, because the study that we had was just to give an example of in going through and discussing this whole issue of the existence of God or gods. The first thing that we did is, I went through and explained how all the reasons that people normally give are actually assuming a God who we already understand to be a false God. And when I mean false in this context, I mean a non-existent God, a God that is literally non-existent, and it is impossible for such a God to exist, a God who is outside of space and time and all of these other things. And another thing I don't think I pointed out at the time, but I'll just mention it now as a side note, that the arguments that theists today give in favor of the existence of a God are not actually directly arguments in favor of a God existing. They're arguments which are trying to prove that it is necessary for this supposed God to exist. Now that's totally different. You know, for me to argue that George Washington existed is one thing, and it's entirely different if I was going to try to argue that it is an absolute necessity for the universe that George Washington had to exist. The existence of the universe depends on the existence of George Washington. That's a totally different thing. Like that, what kind of claim is that? Like that's just really out there when you really think about it. And the arguments that theists give for the existence of God are actually not directly arguments for the existence of God. They're arguments that it is somehow necessary for a being who is outside of time and space and matter and all this stuff to exist. So I actually don't believe that it's somehow necessary for God to exist. I don't think that really makes sense at all, and I don't think there's any sort of evidence to support that claim. But I believe that our Heavenly Family does exist, just like I believe that Barack Obama exists and that George Washington existed and all of these different things. You know, so it's a totally different sort of approach. But I do look forward to conducting a huge variety of experiments on the topic because, you know, one experiment is never enough. And I have actually conducted many more experiments than we've gone through together, but I want you guys to do experiments to like, okay, you know, think about it in terms of, okay, if I want to know if, let's say, Abraham Lincoln existed, you know, what sorts of things could I do? What sorts of experiments could I conduct in order to find that out? Or how about Alexander the Great or whoever, like, and then apply those same principles to our Heavenly Family. Like, is there anything, and this is kind of what we were talking about yesterday too, actually. What do we have in present reality that could inform us on the question of whether or not Yahweh exists? And we could do this for other particular gods too, whether Baal or some other god. Like we can examine the existence of these specific gods and really put it to the test and see, like, okay, is there something there? Is there something to this? And I think that would be an absolutely fruitful line of investigation.
Did you say that you don't think that there needs to be a God for nature to exist like it does on the earth? Like, what about, you know, like intelligent design? You know, like Leroy was, you know, just talking about this, the human body and how incredibly it's designed and, you know, as opposed to, and I understand just because someone's atheist doesn't mean that they're an evolutionist, but how evolution just doesn't seem to really hold up to logic as far as, you know, order coming from randomness, as far as I know. I mean, unless you can tell me something different. But could you expound on that?
Sure. So first, I want to say that what I was saying isn't necessarily that it's not necessary for God to exist for the world to be as it is. What I was saying is that it's not like a universal thing where, like, the universe has to be a God, universe, or a universe that includes the existence of God. That's not a necessity. However, I would go further and say that it's totally possible that there could be a universe with galaxies and planets and plants and animals and creatures and intelligent life and all of that without there being an existent God. And some people are like, does not compute. How does that work? Sorry, what was that, Leroy?
I said, could it be that just not in our knowledge that he existed, but yet all these other nice, orderly things existed?
No. Actually, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there could be a universe, to be clear, I don't believe that this is the case, because I do believe that our Heavenly Family exists, but it's perfectly conceivable, and there's no reason to doubt the possibility that there could be a universe without anything that we would call a God, and yet there still exist planets and galaxies and plants and animals and intelligent life and all of these different things. The reason why that doesn't make sense to people is because people think that complexity or order and all these different things are an evidence of the existence of God. There are actually numerous reasons as to why that is not the case. One reason is if complexity requires a creator, let's say, and that's the way that people think about it. Okay, well, something's complex. This is just too complex that it must require a creator, an intelligent mind to create this. Okay, well, let's take that a step further. If complexity requires a creator, shouldn't the creator be at least as complex as the complexity which is being created? In other words, and this is the way people think, oh, well, God is so magnificent. He's so far beyond everything that he created, because obviously, I mean, if he made all this, he must be some incredible guy. Well, the thing is, that would be saying that God is even more complex than the creation. But if complexity requires a creator, well, then you have the age-old question, who created God? And if you say no one created God, and God didn't require a creator, you are then admitting that complexity does not require a creator. And therefore, you could have all these complex things, you could have whatever, and without a creator. So it's not actually necessary. And you can take that further and, let's say, maybe someone would say someone did create God, but that person would have to be even more complex than God, but that complexity would require a greater complexity, and you keep going, and it's an infinite regression of gods who are more complex, creating gods who are less complex, and literally you just keep going back forever like that. And
if you stop and say, but this God didn't require a creator, isn't that called special pleading?
That's right. That's a logical fallacy called special pleading, where you're trying to say, I'm making an argument that depends on this reasoning, but in order to make your argument, you're actually making an exception for the very thing you're trying to prove in this case. So, yeah, it's a logical fallacy.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So, I know for me, for a long time, I thought, oh, well, it must be, that complexity is one of the evidences for God and all of that. And the same thing with order. If you're going to say, well, things are orderly, and that means that God exists, that doesn't make sense either, because, okay, if order requires an orderer, shouldn't the orderer be ordered? So if God is an orderly being, he has order, and didn't order require a creator? So it's the same thing with complexity. And plus, on top of that, there's really no reason to suggest, just because something's complex, that it absolutely had to be created for some reason. That's a common thought that people have. It's an assumption, but what actual basis does anyone have for believing that to be really the case?
But again, these sorts of things, we've contemplated these things for months and months, And I've been through all the different thought processes and questions and confusion. And, it's been so contrary to how I was raised and how I've thought, as, how I've just thought growing up. Not that I was necessarily told anything specific about these things. Maybe I was. I'm not remembering. But the point being is that, I've been through the whole process of kind of feeling like, wait a second. Well, yeah, that's absolutely reasonable that you can't make special pleading and it be logical. So, what does that mean? And I know that I have enough evidence, material evidence, for the existence of Yahweh to be okay with the fact that I've misunderstood the details about Yahweh that I thought I knew. And so now I'm like, okay, I've misunderstood some things about how this all works, whatever that is. Just fill in the blank. I'm just trying to be a little bit general here, but I've had some misconceptions about this, but those misconceptions don't now negate every fact that I've ever known. It's just, okay, well, this isn't actually true. This one isn't, okay? We can't fall into the trap of just grouping everything together. Like, we've done that in the past with our religious views. We've just grouped everything together and we've thought, okay, well, it's this way and I'm just going to group it all together. Well, then, once we find a few things that we were wrong on, the tendency, what the devil would like to try to do is keep us grouping everything together. That's what he's had us doing all along. Oh, well, I'll just group it all together. Well, if one thing's wrong, everything's wrong.
Yeah.
Nothing's true that I thought was true. And that isn't reasonable either, and I think any one of us here can see that.
Yeah, there's no logical connection between those two things. And this is a great example, actually. Like if someone thinks, oh, no, now my world is falling apart because complexity does not require a creator. Well, wait a second. There's nowhere in the Bible, nowhere in any of these sacred writings that we've had, that actually states that complexity requires a creator. That's totally an unscriptural teaching, and it's not actually part of our religion at all. It's simply a philosophical position that really, like the modern arguments that people have in favor of God, that Christians use, that Jews use, that Muslims use, these were developed by Muslim philosophers in the Middle Ages, and they're building off of other philosophies that go back to certain Greek philosophies and so on. This is totally separate from our religion. It's never been part of our religion, but we've just accepted it because it's part of the Christian culture now, because basically Christians and Jews heard Muslims giving these philosophical arguments in favor of the existence of God and said, well, we believe God exists, so these sound like good arguments, and they just went with it. And so, that is the thing, like that. I just wanted to say that to explain exactly how, if someone was to take that and say, oh no, complexity doesn't require a creator, and say, oh, well, I just don't know what to believe about the Bible and all these things anymore. It's like, okay, those two things really have nothing to do with each other.
It's just like with the Bible itself. We've taken the Protestant canon to be the Bible. I didn't even know there were other Bibles until a few years ago. I mean, that's how ignorant I was. And I just thought, well, everybody has the same Bible. And so then some years back, I learned about the Apocrypha. Before the branch, Ellen might talk about the Apocrypha, and I knew that. And so I started investigating these extra-biblical books, and I accepted them as true, just kind of en masse, It's just as a group, oh, it's the Apocrypha, oh, well then she calls it the Apocrypha, and this is called the Apocrypha, so I'm going to accept all of these books. It was still a canon mentality. But the Bible is not one book. It's a whole bunch of books that had been grouped together and renamed the Bible, no matter what canon it is. And so, the correlation there, or the analogy would be, take each book of the Bible to be a truth that you thought you knew, or an idea that you held to be true. That's a better way of putting it. Picture each book in the Bible being an idea that you held to be true. And you come along and you realize, oh, wait a second, this book in the Bible isn't true. So this idea that you've had amongst all of these other 66 ideas isn't true. Does that mean you throw out all of your ideas as not true because one idea is not true? Well, no, just like we don't take the 66 books in the Bible, or however many books are in your Bible, if you have a different canon, you don't take all those books and then judge every book on one book. They're all different. They're all written by different people. They're all written at different times. They're all different. And so you cannot judge them by another book in the Bible. That wouldn't be fair, and it wouldn't be fair to judge every idea that you've held to be true based on one idea that you've held to be true if you come to find out either that it is true or that it isn't true. If you find out the one idea you've held to be true, that does not mean that every idea you've held to be true is true. And if you come to find out that an idea you've held to be true is false, likewise, it does not logically follow, well, then every idea I've held to be true is false.
Amen to that. Well said. Absolutely. And, it's considering all these principles, what you were saying about the Bible, and if one book turns out not to be true, it doesn't mean that the rest are not true. Christians actually understand that when it comes to other people's Bibles. Like, let's just say Protestants. And if a Protestant was to meet a Catholic, and a Catholic was to be studying their Bible, and conclude, oh man, the book of Tobit just cannot be true. I'm going to throw out the Bible. The Protestant would say to the Catholic, oh, no. Just because Tobit isn't true, that doesn't mean that the rest of the Bible's false. Mm-hmm. They would understand that. But to them, it's because, oh, well, that's not really part of the Bible. But guess what? It was part of the Catholic's Bible. And so, it's just people apply these reasonings so selectively. So we have to always apply it across the board. When we understand a principle, we have to apply it all across the board where it applies. I mean, obviously, different principles apply to different things. But, yeah, that's a really important principle.
It's common sense, basically. Reality.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Adding a little bit to the conversation, we're assuming that everybody thinks logically. And the two things that we might not be actually contending with is that people have an air of laziness and they want something just to be easy. Because we were talking about this earlier today. So, the way that we were basically investigating the Bible and we were slowly deconstructing things, it's a good thing that we deconstructed it very, very slowly because we want to jump to the easy conclusion right away. We want to we want to have it easy, we want to have it palatable, we want to have it chewed, and we want to have it partially digested. And then on top of that, we want it fast. So that's what I have to say. So yeah, absolutely. Just because you lost, you start to question one part of whatever, one part of whatever you're researching, studying, doesn't mean you throw out the baby and the bathwater together.
Exactly. No, that's well said. And it's worth pointing out, too, that the baby is not actually even part of the bathwater. And so, you know, like, that's what we'll do often. Like I'll tell you, honestly, for me right now, I don't even look at Isaiah as a book of the Bible. I just look at it as Isaiah. Isaiah is just Isaiah. Who cares if someone later put it in a collection with other books? That has absolutely zero impact on the truth value of the book itself. And so I think it'll be helpful for us, like, seriously, to just, like, when we look at these writings, to banish from our minds the irrelevant fact that certain people collected it into a certain collection. And of course, when I say banish it from our minds, again, I'm saying that specifically within the context of considering whether it's true or not. It's not that we forget the fact, you know, literally.
Pretend that it didn't exist.
Yeah, pretend that, oh, no one collected a canon. No, it's just that we recognize that is totally irrelevant for each individual writing. Like, it really makes zero difference in terms of the truth value of the book. It's like, okay, so let's take Luke and John, two Gospels in the New Testament. Okay, well, those are just Luke and John. It's not two Gospels in the New Testament originally. You know, Luke wasn't originally part of the Bible. John wasn't part of the Bible because there was no such thing as the Bible. So too often people think of the Gospels, and they think of the four Gospels in the New Testament. But you know what? There's a ton of Gospels. Like, I think some of the latest counts, there's over 40 Gospels that have been written. Some Gospels about the same time as the four Gospels, some after, some earlier. You know, it's not like there's something that's so particularly special about these ones. And so we have to just take, here's a whole bunch of ancient writings written by different individuals, and let's examine them. You know, I think that's just a good way to approach it. And we won't, you know, by falsely grouping things together, we do end up having the tendency to kind of judge everything with whatever we've grouped it with. But, yeah, it's really important to just consider each thing on its own. So I really encourage you guys, think of Isaiah as Isaiah. Don't think of it as, you know, part of the Old Testament. Think of the Gospel of Luke as a gospel that was written along with a second volume, the book of Acts, by somebody connected with the Nazarene movement in most likely the end of the 1st century. And just look at it like that. Look at it as what it is, rather than what people viewed it as by combining it with other things.
I think more rudimentary than that. I think all of us that start to learn anything about anything that resembles truth, once you become known as a purveyor of truth, something that you're offering to mass public or whomever, you become, like we all know, you become responsible for it. And a lot of people want to have the benefits without the responsibility, and they have this implicit fear. I mean, I'm not like totally wanting to, because of my good, benevolent heart, to want to talk to people, but I feel responsible to talk to people now. And I'm like, you know, I keep saying, I'm like, if I don't tell you, if you don't hear it from me, really, whose responsibility is it to tell you? I mean, so, you know, have I self-appointed myself to do so? Okay, so be it. But, you know, there's inherent risks for doing that. And one of the inherent risks for doing that is basically you getting your head chopped off, whether figuratively or literally. And, you know, the truth, like I said, a thing we all know, that the truth has a certain has a certain heaviness, a certain, not all the time, but it has a certain unfamiliarity. Trailblazing through new ideas, like I said, through woods is not very fun. I mean, it's explorative, but it's not necessarily devoid of pitfalls and bears wanting to tear you from limb to limb. So
not popular.
No, it's not popular, and a lot of times it's not safe either, because it seems, radical. It seems different. It seems whatever it is. But again, I mean, who's going to do it? I mean, why not us? I mean, why us first, and why not us second? I mean, really, what are we really afraid of, period? Other than getting our heads chopped off. And if your head gets chopped off, then whatever. You won't feel it anyway.
Welcome to the branch revolution. This is, in a sense, going into what may seem like uncharted territory, at least some elements, perhaps many elements in a sense. It's, a different experience, but you know what? Yes. Why us and why not us?
Jesus
really, we are privileged.
What?
That Jesus went into it?
Yeah, he went into what was uncharted territory in his day. He had something that was radical and different, and he didn't accept what was taken for granted as true in his day. And you know what, everyone, I know I've mentioned it many times, but please study the Apocryphon of James, because, as we're talking about these things, and, I was just about to mention how, Jesus had to often correct the misconceptions of his disciples, and to them, they just, went into despair, and just, it was a roller coaster for them. And he's like, hey, guys, I'm just telling you the truth. I'm telling you like it is. And they would kind of go from extreme to extreme and be on this roller coaster ride, and they would blame him for it even. And he was just right there on the truth the whole time. And the experience of the disciples, especially as outlined in the Apocryphon of James, has such a parallel to the experience of branches today. And so I encourage you guys, yet again, to study the Apocryphon of James. It's so full of insight and so full of good principle. It would be really such a loss to miss out on it.
Well, a lot of times...
Go ahead, John.
I said a lot of times, we've heard... Put it this way, at least our group in Michigan has heard the terminology. We were just talking about this not too long ago, about, not being, others thinking that they're going to be jumping on the crazy train. It's something so revolutionary, so, I've never heard this before. Nobody's ever done this before. I mean, thus it's, brand new. So in one aspect, people don't like being punked out, or they don't like being lied to, in that respect. However, in another respect, all of us, me being the first to point my finger, I swallow the lie of the devil wholeheartedly. Oh, it's awesome. Woo! I don't want to jump. This is way too dangerous to jump. But you don't want to be played the fool, but you are playing the fool. So I don't understand why people would be afraid, me being included in that. But maybe there's something more to the overall mechanism of lying that we are not seeing. I'm just saying. I was just thinking in the background as you were talking.
I've been listening to the Proverbs. I never really paid much attention to them before, the bits and pieces. I'd like to study them sometime. They are beautiful, full of principles too.
Yeah, lots of principles there for sure. Each one of these writings is really important to investigate. And Proverbs, yes, it's one of the things that we've been instructed to investigate Whether we go through it together on the calls or not is another story. Who knows what will happen? Obviously, there's just so many things to study, and really, ultimately, it's like, in a sense, everything that we're studying is a case study. We're doing it as a case study to highlight principles, because the principles are what is really important. And, I wanted to go back for a second to one of the things that you were saying there, John, about, kind of the fear of kind of diving into this, and, the mechanisms of deception and all of that. Well, fear is actually such a huge part of all of this. And the devil plays on fear so much and really tries to draw people into inactivity because of fear. And, I totally relate to fear, and hey, there's lots of things that I've been afraid of and not wanted to do, and been, scared to jump down a certain rabbit hole or whatever, There have been plenty of things. But every time I have to just say, you know what? Well, I got to follow the truth, whatever it is. And ultimately, we have to do things in spite of our fears. We can't expect that those feelings are just going to vanish and wait for them to vanish before doing something. What we can do is we can say, you know what, I am going to not let it overcome me, and I'm going to act. And then as we act, the fear will disappear. And that's what has happened in my experience, in that, I've been afraid to question certain things, and I've been afraid to do certain things and say certain things and be in certain situations. And I've found myself introducing things that I'm afraid of, in a sense, like in a conversation with someone. And why? And ultimately it's because I don't care that I have a certain feeling of fear or whatever, in the sense that I'm not going to allow it to prevent me from going where I need to go. Because ultimately, here's the thing, fear is consuming. And it's like this. If someone is, it's kind of like this. I just thought of a better analogy. Sometimes someone is just afraid of the pain of pulling off a Band-Aid, so they're doing it so slow and trying to make it not hurt. And meanwhile, they're extending the experience of it, 50 times what it needs to be, when they could just rip off the Band-Aid and just get over it already, and then they'll be okay. And that's the way that fear works. By going with the fear, we become more fearful. It's just like with anxiety. With going with anxiety, we become more and more anxious and more fearful, more and more scared, whatever it may be. And we are actually putting ourselves in a worse and worse place by running with it, by going with it, because we are deceived into thinking that it's the easier thing to do. It's not the easier thing to do. Just like taking off a Band-Aid real slowly isn't the easier way to do things. That's just putting yourself through unnecessary misery. Why? There is no actual reason. It's actually a lack of reason. There's a cause. I'm not saying there's no cause, but the cause is a lack of reason. It's just not allowing the truth to just, dominate. And so what we have to do is say, okay, you know what? If you find yourself in a place where you are feeling fear, because, let's just say that something is, you've had a certain belief, let's say, that now you find out it isn't true, and you're just afraid of what does this lead to, and where does this go? Or let's say you're afraid to question a certain thing or whatever. Don't let that fear dominate you. If you let yourself just be afraid and don't step forward into the thing that you're afraid of, it will overcome you, and you will continue to be afraid. That is what is going to get you in a bad spot. No, you have to go forward into the thing that you're afraid of in order to overcome it, and it will vanish. It really will. I've mentioned before, when I first had the thought of, oh man, in all honesty, I'm going to have to question the authenticity of certain books in the Bible or certain stories, certain claims, and I was tempted to be afraid of that because, what if this is just off limits or something, and what if this is just going down a road of deception and all of that? Well, you know what? I had to just say, okay, let's not examine this on the basis of fear. Let's examine it on the basis of truth. Is it true that it would be wrong to ask these sincere questions and to seek for an answer? And the answer ultimately is no. It's not wrong to do so. And I had to ask, well, what if I examine this with honest question and it turns out that everything I've believed is wrong? Is that something to be afraid of? No, that's not something to be afraid of, because guess what? If everything I believe is wrong, hey, I want to know it, and I want to be corrected on it. And there's nothing to be afraid of in that. What is more frightful is not questioning and staying in a deception, if indeed I am in one, and then forever wondering and being afraid, and, what a trap that is. And so the other possibility is I examine something and find out, oh, this is actually not wrong, or, what I thought is actually correct. Well, in such a case, then I'm not left wondering, and I actually have gained genuine knowledge, and then I confirmed in whatever truth it is. So no need to fear, and operating on fear will only drag us down. The only way to advance is to make decisions not based on fear, but to act based on principle, regardless of your fear. And if principle requires you to do what you're afraid of, or to think what you're afraid to think, or to ask what you're afraid to ask, if truth and reason require you to do so, do it anyway. And the more you do that, the more you practice conquering fears, the more you will be able to do it in regard to other things. You'll find yourself less fearful in general because, well, you've seen that fear is nothing to drag you down.
Amen. Comment?
Yes.
And we don't make our decisions based on what somebody else is going to think about us either, that we're going to be unpopular, or they're going to hate us, or think we're crazy, or that's not a good reason to make decisions.
It's also not good to assume that that'll be the case either. One of the things that has been kind of on my heart lately in varying circumstances is the awareness, and this is outside of, I'll rephrase this, what I'm about to mention, what brought this to my mind is outside of the branch and outside of our group. But I recognized that it can be applied to the branch message, and it can be applied to our group. And that is that one of the most destructive things that I see happening to people, and this has been the case, if anyone listening thinks about their own experience, I'm sure you'll be able to come up with numerous examples of a situation like this, where either you or someone you know has been in a situation where they were either hurting themselves or somebody else was hurting them, and I don't necessarily mean physically, but just doing something self-destructive to them, for their own life, their own well-being. But it might be physically hurting themselves too. I mean, all kinds of things happen. People hurt themselves all the time. And in these circumstances where people are either doing things to hurt themselves or they keep themselves in a situation where someone else is able to hurt them, it will only go on for very long if they isolate themselves. If they try to do it on their own, if they cut people out of their life who want to help them or could help them if they knew there was a need. And I see that as so destructive across the board, this imposed independence that we tend to apply. And, the iron sharpening iron analogy is a true analogy. And I don't think you can come across any profound revelation, any great invention, any positive thing where a person was in a bubble and they didn't talk to anybody about anything, whether they were overt about it or not, doesn't matter, but they have to interact to really benefit and be benefited. And so one of the things that I also see as a potential now coming to the branch specifically, or just in like religion in general, is when we come to things that challenge our beliefs, or when we come up with a question, what the devil will often try to do is try to convince someone, oh, well, if you have a question, then you should just throw everything out until you know the truth. Now, how does that help anything? It doesn't. So that's just something to keep in mind when dealing with things, when investigating things, is, we don't go to extremes. I mean, that's not what we should do anyway. It's not a healthy position to take, to go to extremes and to be like high and low, depending on your circumstance. We should be steady and even and determined and teachable and
cautious, totally.
But not rash, not like I mentioned earlier, oh, well, I've had one idea either compromised, like maybe it's not true, or maybe it's been totally demolished and you know that it's not true. Well, that's not a reason to then say, I don't know anything. But that's what the devil wants us to do for sure.
And actually, just to expand on this, Yeah, so last night I mentioned Biblical Archaeology Society and their website and becoming a member, and a particular series of videos by archaeologist William Dever concerning the history of Israel from the perspective of archaeology. And so I went back today just because I had referenced it, so I wanted to go back and check it out again and, look at a couple things. And so I was watching some of it, and he started talking about this whole thing about knowing and how there's a movement of people today called revisionists. That's the title that they've given themselves, who essentially are approaching history in such a way that basically there's not sufficient evidence to think that anything exists. So basically, like, all ancient Israel, all, basically nothing existed until the time of the Maccabees. There's, no prehistory of Israel, no history of Israel. Everything was a Jewish invention from the 2nd century BCE from the Maccabees. And, he was pointing out how this is part of a broader movement of postmodernism. And, there's postmodernism is basically a paradigm today which, people say, okay, well, we live now in the postmodern world. And it's basically hard to specifically define, but it basically is saying any sort of social structure, any sort of thought structure, any paradigm that we've had, it's basically saying that everything is invalid. And the classical way to explain a postmodern view is, when someone says, well, that's true for him, that's not true for me. And it's just, truth becomes equated with basically just what people believe. And there is no actual truth out there. It's just simply people believe different things, and what one person believes is just as good as another person. And, people glorify that type of mindset because they equate it with tolerance. And they think that it's humble because basically you're not downing on anyone's belief, and you're not saying that anyone's wrong on anything. Everyone's entitled to believe what they believe, and everything is just as good as anything else. Well, everyone is entitled to believe whatever they want to believe, but that doesn't mean that it's as good as anything else or as legitimate. There are many beliefs that people have that have been demonstrated to be wrong. And we can actually determine what is true. And so ultimately, when people apply this to history, this mindset of basically you can't really know anything, it becomes everything is a debunking. Everything is let's basically just say that we don't have enough information to believe anything. And so literally all it is excusing evidence. And so, people will say, basically it's a mindset of denial, ultimately, is what it comes down to, because, you have people denying the history of Israel, even that there was such a nation, in spite of the fact that literally there is a huge, vast field of information on ancient Israel. Ancient writings, ancient inscriptions, Israelite cities and towns and people, actually the bodies of people and everything, dug up from the ground. There has been, decades upon decades of research on this, and it's just a huge, vast body of information, and that is simply ignored. And, you have, I think the earliest reference that we have to Israel is actually from Egypt, and it mentions the people Israel. It's from the around the year 1200 BCE or somewhere around there. And it's like, man, okay, there's actually huge bodies of information. It's not like it's hidden or hard to see. It's all like public information that people can find, and yet people deny it. And that's kind of this whole thing of thinking that we just can't know anything. And the fact is, no, we can. We really, really can. And there is what ends up happening, the postmodern view is basically throwing away the scientific method, throwing away logic, because once you basically say that nothing can really be known, and one person's truth is as good as another person's truth, or anything kind of along those lines, things are so indeterminate. You're throwing away simple realities, like simply a tree is a tree is a tree. That's what it is. These are very simple things, and if you follow those progressions of thought, something is what it is. Therefore, it is not what it is not. Something cannot both be something and not be that same thing at the same time in the same way. And that means that if something is one thing and it can't be not that thing, then there's no other thing that it could be other than what it is. These are the rules of logic. I'm just explaining it in a non-technical way. But these are the foundational laws of logic. And if we just simply understand that, and these are very basic things that we have confirmed to us with literally every observation that we make in life, we can determine that, yeah, we can actually know things. And, so I know this really goes back to what we were talking about last night, but it kind of dovetails with some of the things that Teresa was saying. So anyways, any other thoughts?
We can do nothing against the truth but for the truth.
Amen. Yeah, ultimately, truth has the victory. It's the only thing that can possibly stand.
Well, you can't change the truth. I mean, the truth just is. And so you can choose to disbelieve it, but it doesn't make it not true.
People speaking against it just bring it into more people hear about it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our Heavenly Family is okay with using bad publicity, so to speak, to publish the gospel. Because even though there may be controversy, I'm trying to remember how Ellen White puts it, but she says something, and then she says, but regardless, everywhere Christ is preached. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it's based off of a statement from Paul where he says just that. People were corrupting the gospel of Christ and preaching it, and he said, hey, nonetheless, Christ is preached.
Right.
And so yeah.
It's Paul I was thinking of, but it sounded like something Ellen White would write. But, yeah, it's totally a quote from Paul that I'm thinking of.
So, any other comments, questions, anything like that?
Christ says he is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life.
Amen to that. It's an oft misunderstood statement, but it's a true statement nonetheless. Go ahead.
I've just been thinking the whole call about atheism, and if atheists are good people, and they are, I've often said they're wonderful, actually, which is kind of how I got into this whole thing to start with a couple years ago. But that just proves the Heavenly Family. Like if they're mostly good people, then it just proves the biblical principles are true. Period. I don't know.
I think I understand what you're saying in terms of what scriptures teach concerning morality.
Right, because why would they do it?
Basically.
Because morality is outside of God. And so if they're moral, and they typically are, I agree, then what we're learning is true. The morality is outside of God. It's just the truth. And I don't know, just so much to think about.
Definitely a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're learning it from people that do believe in God, maybe.
No,
not
necessarily.
No.
That's not really the case because, again, so this is one thing that I want to address because that kind of assumes that morality comes from God, again. But morality really doesn't come from God. Morality is simply what is right or what is wrong according to material reality. Material reality is the only reality there is, and it's something that we all share. And whether someone believes in God or not, they can ultimately deduce what is right or wrong based off of just material reality. Someone could just grow up and not see any other human. Like, let's just say they were stranded on an island, to use such a typical example, with no other human there even, and just, grew up with other animals. They could end up developing an understanding of what is right and wrong and living it without any thought of God at all, without any belief in God, any idea of what a God is or anything like that. All they know is, hey, I'm living on this place with other creatures and I want to do what's good. So
those people will be saved that choose to do good.
Absolutely.
Even without any knowledge of God, if they have no way of knowing that there is such a God. Paul talks about that too. Mm-hmm. How the Gentiles who by nature do that which is in the law are a law unto themselves.
Absolutely.
And so, very, very interesting. And one of the worst things that has happened in regard to affecting the world's belief in God or that sort of thing is the combining of these books in the Bible, calling them all by the same standard, judging them all as one big thing, and then saying that that is a reflection of what and who God is. And so you have all these different writings, and even amongst some of the books, we've come to learn that that book wasn't necessarily written by just one individual as we have it today. As we have it today, some books are compilations and revisions and combinations of various authors' writings. How do we judge what's true and what's not? We judge it by reality, by morality, right? If it is immoral, that would mean that it's going against morality, which would then mean, logically speaking, that it's going against the truth. And if that's the case, we cannot get caught up in the mindset of trying to harmonize it or rationalize it, try to reason it away as to why it's still true, even though it contradicts what would be morally right. And then what will often happen is if a person finally comes to the point of being able to say, okay, I'm not going to just accept this wholesale, this being the books in the Bible, I'm not going to accept this wholesale. I'm going to start examining it critically, bit by bit, book by book, piece by piece, verse by verse, whatever, and look for what's true. Well, if it's true, it's true. And just because somebody put it together with something that's not true doesn't mean that it's also not true. So, yeah, I look forward to the reality of what has been combined in the Bible, kind of the reality of that situation being more widely known, and for our Heavenly Family's character to be represented truthfully, so that more people have a genuine opportunity to choose between, right or wrong.
Amen. So, and I just want to say that I totally agree that one of the things that has contributed the most to a misrepresentation of our Heavenly Family is the creation of the various canons.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And to go back for a second to what you were saying, Leroy, the reason why it's important to understand this about morality and all of that, well, there are actually many, many reasons. But so often what happens, we all tend to view things from a very, I'm trying to think of a way to explain this in a way that accurately conveys what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to have to explain it in a couple different ways that each has its own nuance. We all view things from our own perspective. Now that sounds like a stupidly obvious statement in a sense, but another way to put that is that we expect things to fit into how we have typically viewed things. And if we're used to viewing things as, well, morality comes from God, well, then we don't expect an atheist to be moral, and we think that, well, there must be some sort of explanation as to how if an atheist is moral, it must be that they learn it from someone who believes in God or something like that at some point. And, what that is ultimately is an attempt to fit things into our own perspective and our own view. But what we have to realize, and this is what our Heavenly Father is trying to do, is really expand our perspectives and recognize that, hey, people have their own views, and we need to really try and accurately represent their own views. And this is something which has been totally missed in discourse, in dialogue, period, throughout the history of the world, where people don't care to accurately understand and represent another person's view. And this has happened a lot with atheists, where religious people will misrepresent atheists, and people say, oh, atheism is a religion. I mean, that's just wrong. It's just simply not true. Atheism really isn't a religion. Atheism isn't even a belief. People think, oh, well, that takes just as much faith as another thing, as my religion. Those statements are misrepresenting other people's perspectives, and it doesn't help at all, because let's say someone is an atheist, and really all that means is they just don't have an active belief in any particular God. They might not even say God doesn't exist. They're just thinking, I don't know of. There's some atheists who are just totally, honestly, just, hey, they don't see enough evidence to persuade them in the existence of a God, and in fact, the only God that they've ever heard of is a God that cannot exist, from what we've found. And so, hey, they're just there. They don't see any valid reason to believe in a God. And, they have a lot of other beliefs on a lot of other things in life, just like everyone does. and they're just going through life. And if someone comes along and, says something like, oh, atheism is a religion and it requires faith just like my beliefs, and they know that that's not true. And hearing someone say that is going to just reveal to that individual the other person's ignorance. They're going to know that the person who's saying that atheism is a religion or whatever is just basically being a parrot and hearing what they heard some apologists, or repeating what they heard some apologists say because it happens to jive with them. And it's really a dishonest way of doing things. And this is what faith often does. And this is what false faith is. And many atheists have recognized this, that the way that people of faith go about things is that people pretend to know what they don't know and label that faith. But ultimately, it's just pretending to know what we don't know, and just, misrepresenting. And often one of the things that happens in following that is misrepresenting other people's positions to be at least just as unjustifiable as our own positions, and then we use that as a prop to keep our own beliefs up. And it's just so wrong. And so it's really important for us to recognize that, hey, there's a lot in this world that isn't going to fit in to how we've become accustomed to viewing things. And a lot of people have different perspectives, and they think a certain way, and it's not how we've thought. And, this reminds me, like some people, okay, I remember one time seeing someone call into a show, and they're saying, and it was talking to atheists and saying, so you don't believe the Bible? And they're like, no, we don't believe the Bible. And the individual replied, well, everyone knows the Bible is true. And it's like, actually, no. There's actually literally billions of people out there who don't believe the Bible. And it's just kind of like someone saying, someone in another country which has another religion that's the dominant religion, and saying, well, everyone knows that the Quran is true, or everyone knows that the Vedas are true, that the Hindu scriptures. The fact is, no, the world is so much bigger than our bubble. It's so much bigger than our perspective. And we have to recognize that there are a lot of other beliefs out there and positions, things that aren't necessarily even beliefs. And it's important to not misrepresent them or to impose our expectations on them or anything like that. So it's a process of learning and all of that, in terms of, kind of assessing our own assumptions and, learning not to place our assumptions upon other people and so on.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we can understand morality outside of God, then what is the need of God?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And the first thing that I want to point out is that it first is based off of the assumption that has been developed in the modern world concerning what God is about and who God is and all of that. And again, the scriptures don't teach that God is the decider of morals. So that the first thing that I want to point out, and this isn't to lessen the importance of your question, like your question is totally understandable, but the first thing that I want to point out is that any ancient Israelite or ancient Jew, if asked that question, it just wouldn't make sense to them. It would be like asking, I'm just going to try and think of an example quick. Well, if you can't use a knife to open a can of beans, what can you use it for? It would come across like that question to an ancient Israelite or an ancient Jew would would sound the same as someone today asking something like that. Well, if you can't use a knife to open a can of beans, what can you use it for? So it's based off of a misconception. A knife isn't for opening a can of beans anyway, you know. And so it was never originally the thought, and that God is the one who makes morals and all of that. So, and here's the thing, what is God needed for? In a sense, like, we think that God is like a necessary part of the universe. God isn't a necessary part of the universe or necessary in order for the universe to be. But, so here's the thing, like, often we as a society use terms differently when it applies to God in ways that we don't use it when it applies to anyone else. So if we talk about needing God, what we think that means is that it's just impossible to exist or impossible to do something without God. Well, that's not the way that we use it when we talk about anyone else. Like, I can say, I need Teresa, and I really do need Teresa. You know, like, I really would not be able to do many things without Teresa. But does it mean that if Teresa didn't exist, I couldn't exist? No. Does it mean that I literally could not live if Teresa didn't exist? No. Does it mean that I couldn't understand things and have a happy life and all of that? No, actually. If Teresa didn't exist, it wouldn't even be a thing to be happy or not happy because of her non-existence. And me saying this isn't degrading to her either. It's just acknowledging that things could have happened differently, and it could have just not existed, and it wouldn't make a difference to me if that was the case, because
you wouldn't know any different.
I wouldn't know any different, you know. But within our circumstances, man, I need her, and why is that? What do I mean by that when I say I need Teresa? It means that, man, she does a whole lot for me. She fills needs that I have. I need someone to encourage me. I need someone to help me with day-to-day life. I need someone to discuss things with and to share everything with and all of that. She fills all those needs. And so, in a very real sense, I need her. Now, that is a way of using the word need that actually makes sense in everyday life, and it's the way that we use it when we talk about anything in regular life. And that is the same way in which we need our heavenly family. We need them because, man, we have been so messed up. Here's probably the greatest example I can think of right now as to why we need our heavenly family. Look at where we were 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and how just this is one moment where I'm honestly thinking it's hard to express this with the needed emphasis without using words that people could be offended with. But I'm going to not use it anyways. The fact of reality is that we have been so messed up. Our way of thinking has been so messed up. We have had no sound definition of truth. We have been operating based off of assumptions and biases and presuppositions. We have had such a lack of love. We've been so self-deceived, thinking that we're all right when we're all wrong. And, you know, all the various elements of the message have showed us how off base we have been. And I can look at my life, and each of you, I encourage you to do the same, and look how off you have been, how ignorant, how unloving, how unreasonable, and all of that. And I look at myself, and I see just that. I've been so selfish, so unloving, so unreasonable, so ignorant, so bigoted, so savage. I can go on with a huge list of how far off that I've been. And I in order to come to the understanding that I have now, I needed help from outside myself. I couldn't just come up with all these realizations of what is truth, what is morality, what is this, what is that. No. I was totally screwed. I was a mess. And I, in learning the branch message, I was introduced to the idea of a woman named Wisdom, and I read it in Proverbs, and say unto wisdom, you are my sister, call understanding your intimate friend. And, I realized that I was so messed up and that she was the one who could help me. At least that's what the claim was. I didn't actually believe it. I didn't know. I just knew that the claim was that she could help me. And I figured, well, since the message was able to awaken me to my own messed up state, maybe it's right that there is a woman named Wisdom, and maybe she can actually help me. And so I asked her to help me. And this whole message and everything that has happened in my life and everything that has happened in all of your lives as a result of this message, your realizations, your whatever, all of this as a result of the message has been something which I could have never dreamed of. And it all comes from her, this woman named Wisdom. And man, every error that I have had that has been corrected, every habit of thinking, every habit of behaving, everything that I have been so screwed up on, that she has helped me with, is an example of exactly why and exactly how I need our Heavenly Family. Even though they don't decide morals, man, they helped me to understand morality. And they, in their grace and in their love, freed me from the way of thinking that was immoral and perpetuated my own immorality. And they gave me a new way of thinking that is in harmony with what is real and thus is moral. And I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it on my own. I tried. I really did. And it wasn't until I asked Wisdom that all of this changed. And so I need our Heavenly Family so desperately, and that has not changed a bit with them revealing this message and showing us all these things. It continues on that I need them every day. So that is what we need our Heavenly Family for. We need our Heavenly Family to free us of this mess. And they have been. They have been doing so much. The fact that we're here talking about these things right now is evidence of that. And I will forever need them. Why? Because they are so wise and so loving. And frankly, there is just a ton of stuff that I can and need to learn from them. They are the greatest teachers that the universe has ever known, and I intend to learn from them forever.
Amen.
So I hope that's helpful in answer to your question, Rebecca, and for everyone else too.
Amen. Thank you. I stand corrected on the other thing also. It might take me a while to be able to explain it, but I believe it.
Well, amen. Being corrected is a wonderful thing. It's one of my favorite experiences. So, I don't know if anyone else had comments or questions, and it is getting later, and we should probably bring the meeting to an end soon. So I'll just ask one last time if there are any questions or comments in relation to this subject, and if not, would someone like to volunteer to thank our Heavenly Family?
I will. Dear Heavenly Family, we thank you for so many revelations and a new way of thinking and growing in your grace. We ask for your continued presence with all of us, even though we're not together on the call. Please help us to represent you aright as you're working for us to do, and to cause a revival and reformation on our world. In the name of the branch, Jesus' new name, we pray and thank you and praise you. Amen.
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 Amen.